interest. I am Malika Ramsey. Thanks for joining us again this week. With me is leader of the People's National Congress Reform and leader of the opposition, Brigadier the Honorable David Granger. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Malika.
On this week's program, we focus on anti-money laundering and countering financial and terrorism legislation. And we focus on that because it has been in the news for some time now. The government has been involved, the opposition has been involved also, and both sides have been accused of not putting forward proposals when it comes to this issue that would benefit the people of Guyana. So, of course, Mr. Granger will clear up APNU's side. Now, Mr. Granger, yourself and the Partnership for National Unity, you're accusing the PPPC government of misleading the public when it comes to the anti-money laundering legislation. How has the government misled the country?
Thank you for that question, Malika. In a very serious way and over a very long period of time. The government first introduced anti-money laundering legislation in 2000, that was 14 years ago. But the government was very dilatory, I would say almost delinquent, in implementing its own legislation. And it was severely criticized by international organizations because it was clear that although the legislation was there on the books, there on the paper, there was actually no enforcement. Nobody had been prosecuted, nobody had been investigated, no reports of suspicious transactions were being made, and money laundering was continuing to flourish in Guyana. And this went on until 2007 or thereabouts, and pressure was brought on the government by the international financial community to amend the legislation to include the crime of financing terrorism. So the government took its own sweet time. They set up a parliamentary committee in 2007. It took a year to meet and complete its work. After that, it took another year before the act was brought before the National Assembly. So it was not until 2009, 9 years after the first act was introduced, that the People's Progressive Party Civic Administration actually brought before the Guyanese nation something called the Anti-Money Laundering and Countering the Financing of Terrorism Act. Now, I would say the PPP is misleading because the PPP has never admitted publicly that they really had an act for 14 years. And it was the PPP, not the APN. The APN was not even in existence then. It was the PPP which had been failing to act all along.
Okay. So, how do you go? Because one of the things you would have been accused of too, APNU, is not going to the people and saying, well, this is what AML is about, meaning anti-money laundering, and this is our involvement. How do you change that now at this stage?
Well, what happened after the 2009 Act was introduced, the PPP administration came under even more criticism. And again, the PPP has not been open and frank with the public to explain that these criticisms have been coming for 5 years, since 2009. The Caribbean Financial Action Task Force has actually submitted 5 very critical reports, and they are available to the public, about the PPP's lack of performance, about the PPP's delinquency, about the PPP's dereliction of duty. So it was not that the opposition failed to alert the public. The PPP is now creating the impression that the opposition somehow or the other is delaying the approval of the current Anti-Money Laundering and Countering the Financing of Terrorism Act. Now, what has happened is because of the large number of criticisms and recommendations coming from the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, the PPP, although it received those recommendations in 2011, only brought those recommendations to the National Assembly in April 2013. When it was faced with a deadline. And from that time, the PPP has been inventing deadlines in order to scare the public that if those deadlines were not met, the sky would fall. What really happened is that the PPP was aware of those recommendations. For example, the strengthening of the Financial Intelligence Unit. Everyone knew that for the longest while, the FIU, as it's called, had one person. It did not have a staff. It had no investigators. It was not publishing reports. In fact, the National Assembly got the first report from the FIU last year, November. So we can see where the attempt to deceive the public rests. It's purely within the PPP. So when the matter came before the National Assembly in April last year, we realized right away that this was a complex act. It was not a black and white issue. It was not a cut and dried issue. It is something that needed thorough analysis. And the National Assembly voted for it to be sent to what is called a special committee so it could be examined. But in examination, it was discovered that there were many flaws, even flaws which the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force did not recommend changes to. And this is what has been happening. Now, another process started, and let me take you to another stage of the story, that even while the bill was being examined in the Special Select Committee, in October last year, the chairperson of that committee, Ms. Gail Teixeira, MP, of course, she's an MP, she abruptly terminated the sittings of the special committee around I think it might have been around the 21st of October. She attempted to bring the report to the National Assembly without the approval of the opposition members of the special committee, and it was not accepted. It was defeated. So they had to retable it in December. So from October, we've been losing time. November, we lost time. December, just about the start of the Christmas holidays, this matter comes back. But a Partnership for National Unity has at all times stated it wants to ensure that the bill is a transparent bill, it's an enforceable bill, it's not a porous bill that people can dodge. Because for 13 years, the PPP has had a bill, has an act which people have been dodging because of weak enforcement. We want to put an end to that weak enforcement. So we are, in the APNU, we are struggling now. We have met over 2 weekends ago. Saturday we met, Sunday we met. Our members, there are 4 members of the committee, Mr. Carl Granger, Mr. Basil Williams, Mr. Joseph Harmon, and Jai Paul Sharma. They are meeting to ensure that the Guyanese people will be satisfied with the Anti-Money Laundering Act.
So I'm going to want to come back to that struggle you mentioned in terms of meeting to ensure that Guyanese people benefit. Earlier you said something that basically the PPP, may not be in these exact words, were inventing deadlines. Are you saying that these are not deadlines that were given, just for clarity, that were given by CFATF?
One deadline was given, so I'm aware of, in November. You see, CFATF does periodic reviews, and the FIU, the Financial Intelligence Unit, is responsible for sending in reports in response to those recommendations. So it was not as though Guyana was about to be blacklisted, because Guyana could have avoided blacklisting if all along in 2011, 2012, the FIU was submitting its reports on time and was implementing those recommendations. It did not have to come to this stage, which seems to be confrontational. APNU is not confronting anybody. APNU is just insisting on due diligence. But what has happened is the FIU and the government, even when the PPP had a majority in Parliament, they had a majority in the special committee, they were taking their own sweet time. Now they've lost the majority in Parliament. They discover that they cannot push through the changes that they would like to see pushed through. In fact, they're not even interested in change. They're interested in a weak act and a weak bill, so they could just show it to the international community, say, here, you told us to introduce a new bill, here it is. But they're not interested in enforcement, and this is the point that the public needs to understand. The PPP is not speaking about enforcement. The PPP is speaking only about the passage of a bill. But we in APNU are speaking about enforcement. And if we keep the FIU weak, if we keep the Bank of Guyana weak, if we don't even implement something called SOKU, I'm sure most of the public don't know about SOKU. I'm sure the PPP doesn't explain about SOKU. It was only in November last year that Dr. Roger Luncheon, the head of the Presidential Secretariat, announced the plan to establish the Special Organized Crime Unit. So all along, the government had the Financial Intelligence Unit, but it had no arm. It had no investigative arm. It had no enforcement arm. It was only November last year. Again, the public doesn't know that the government invented this SOCU as the arm that is going to actually go out there and arrest and check and take people to court. It has never been done by the FIU. So we want a strong Bank of Guyana. We want a strong DPP, that is the Director of Public Prosecution. We want a strong FIU. We want a strong SOCU. And that is what we are struggling to do, ensure that there is strength in the act. The PPP just wants to pass an act. And we are resisting that. We are saying, ensure the act is enforceable.
But I'm happy that you said they just want to pass an act, because I'm going to fast forward a bit here. Why did it take APNU so long to have their own amendments added? And I'm asking too because that is being used, or it's being put to the public as though it was a delay tactic.
No, APNU is not interested in delaying. In fact, we are trying to do in 10 months what the PPP failed to do in 14 years. We called for stakeholders to present memoranda to us, and people like Professor Clive Thomas, Mr. Christopher Ram, and others, I think the Bar Association, have presented memoranda. And we've been going through the act, the principal act, that is the 2009 act, not just the amendments. We've been going through the act clause by clause. That is what has been taking time. So we are not interested in delay, but we decided to listen to the stakeholders and not simply listen to the PPP or listen to the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. So it is itself a slow process, but we have been doing our best to ensure that it's a transparent process and that at the end of it, we clean up the act.
Are you satisfied that not only the public, but I'm going to go specifically here to maybe the private sector and possibly civil society, are you whether satisfied or concerned that they're on board with you, or do you get that they understand APNU's position in this?
The PPP Civic Administration's control of large television station, the NCN, control of the Government News Agency, control of the Guyana Chronicle, and its influence over other publications, combined to ensure that the propaganda coming out of the PPP Civic Administration has dominated the news media. I cannot say for sure what the individual groups think. I know for sure that several of them, for example, the Russian ambassador, strangely enough, has written me about it. I know that the OAS has spoken, CARICOM has spoken. The PPP is obviously circling the wagons. The PPP is obviously trying to mobilize opinion against the opposition, which I think is unfair and almost unethical for them to be called to intrude into Guyana's affairs. So I would say that our position is quite clear, and I would hope that the private sector understand much better now where APNU stands on anti-money laundering.
I don't want it to seem as though I'm hitting at this, but in terms of your meeting with them, do you get that, okay, we met with Mr. Granger, we met with the team, we get where they're coming from?
I feel this. We've gotten a message across, yes.
All right. Sir, as we approach wrap-up time now, the next sitting of Parliament is going to be on the 27th of February. Now we were seeing a deadline a day or two after that. How is APNU prepared to handle that? Can you?
We are prepared to work towards ensuring that the bill is cleaned up. When we get to the National Assembly is another matter, because I've written the President calling for him to attend to certain governance issues. And quite frankly, we are expecting the President to respond as to how he intends to deal with those governance issues.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. This has been another edition of the Public Interest. We were focusing on anti-money laundering and countering financial terrorism. I am Malaika Ramsey. Of course, with me was Leader of the People's National Congress Reform and Leader of the Opposition, Brigadier the Honorable David Granger. Join us again next time.